Hey everyone! So, you're starting your course on Hong Kong constitutional law. Think of this as your guide for that very first lecture. We're going to break down the big ideas to make sure you start off on the right foot. First things first, let's look at a direct quote from your professor's learning outcomes. Stop panicking about this course. I love this because it's so real. Constitutional law can feel like a monster, right? But it doesn't have to be. Our goal today is to swap that panic for a solid game plan.
So let's start with that game plan. Before we even dive into the legal stuff, let's talk about how to actually do well in this course. And that means knowing what traps to avoid.
Okay, we've all been there. It is so tempting to just grab notes from a student who took the course last year, or to just flick through the lecture slides, right? Or the classic trap, thinking open book exam means you don't really have to study. Look, I get it, but these are absolute pitfalls. Because here's the brutal truth. Those shortcuts, they lead to a really shallow understanding of the law. Your exam answers end up sounding generic without any real insight. Your grades take a hit, and honestly, down the line, this is the stuff that can affect whether you land that training contract or pupillage. It really matters. And listen to your professor on this one. The all caps "trust me on this" is there for a reason. Showing up to tutorials and actually discussing these ideas, that's where the magic happens. It's where you stop just memorizing facts and you start learning how to think like a lawyer. That's the whole point. And look, you've got some cool new tools to help, like this legal study bot that's being tested. It's trained on your course materials, which is awesome for revision. But just remember the warning. It's a supplement, not a substitute. It can't do the heavy lifting for you. The reading, the thinking, the arguing, that's all on you. Okay, so practical advice out of the way, let's get into the real substance. And we have to start with the biggest question of all. What even is a constitution? Well, in a nutshell, here's the definition. A constitution is the fundamental law of a society. It's the ultimate rule book. It lays out the entire framework for how a country is run, how the government works, and what the basic rules of the game are. So what does this big rule book actually do? Well, a whole lot. It sets up the government, the legislature, the courts. It often paints a picture of the kind of society a country wants to be. And, crucially, it puts limits on the government's power and spells out our fundamental rights. Now, this leads to a really cool philosophical question. What makes a law a law? I mean, if a rule gets its authority from a higher law, where does that law get its authority from? How far up the chain can you go before you just run out of laws?
Let's make this real. Imagine you get a tax demand. Why is it valid? Because the Inland Revenue Ordinance says so. Okay, but why is the ordinance valid? Because the Legislative Council passed it, using powers from the Basic Law. Right. And the Basic Law? It gets its authority from the PRC Constitution. You see? We keep climbing this ladder of legal documents until we hit a wall. The paper trail ends with a revolutionary act, a moment in history that created a new legal order.
And that final stop, that ultimate source of authority where there's no higher written law to point to? Legal theorists have a fancy name for it, the Grundnorm, or the basic norm. It's the bedrock assumption that the whole legal system is built on. All right, next up is a really important distinction that catches a lot of students out. The word constitution is not the same thing as the idea of constitutionalism. One is a thing, the other is a philosophy. Let's untangle that. So here's the difference. A constitution is just the document itself, the text that sets up a government. You can have a constitution for a democracy or a monarchy or anything, really. But constitutionalism, that's a specific political belief. It's the ideology that says government should be limited by that higher law, that no one should be above it. Thomas Jefferson absolutely nailed the idea of constitutionalism with this quote. He's saying you can't just rely on leaders to be good people. The whole point of a constitution, in this view, is to tie their hands, to bind him down from mischief. It's the idea of a government of laws, not a government of powerful individuals. Now, something you have to remember is that these documents don't just magically appear. Every single constitution has a story. And if you don't understand that story, that historical context, you'll never really understand the law itself. Take South Africa, for example. Its modern constitution was created right at the end of apartheid. So it's not just a neutral set of rules. It's designed to be actively transformative. The entire goal is to tear down the old system and build a new society based on equality and human dignity. That history is baked right into the document. It's the same story for the U.S. Constitution. It was written by people who had just fought a revolution against a king. So what did they create? A document that is obsessed with limiting power, splitting it up, and making it clear that authority comes from the people, not from a monarch. The revolution is its DNA. And that brings us to Hong Kong. The context for the Basic Law is, of course, the transfer of sovereignty. But, and this is so important, that context isn't just dead history. As you can see from this report about debates over school textbooks, the meaning of that history is still being fought over today. And that fight has a real impact on how we interpret the law. So what this all shows us is that constitutions can do different things. Some are transformative, trying to build a new world. Others are preservative, trying to keep an existing system in place. And what's so fascinating about the Hong Kong Basic Law is that you can argue it's both. It's transformative because sovereignty changed, but it's also preservative because it was designed to keep Hong Kong's systems the same. Okay, let's pull all of this together. How does this help you nail your exam? Well, it's time to put on your lawyer hat. Here's the #1 takeaway for your exams. This course is not a memory test. Nobody wants you to just recite articles from the Basic Law. They want you to use the law, the court cases, and the history to answer the big question, how is this society governed in practice? It's all about analysis. So, with all that in mind, here's a classic exam-style question for you. Is the Hong Kong Basic Law a constitution? Explain. There is no simple yes or no answer here. The entire point of the question is to see how you build your argument. And that's what I'll leave you with. Using everything we've just talked about, the definition, the functions, the difference between a constitution and constitutionalism, and the vital importance of context, how would you begin to answer that question? What points would you make? Start thinking about that right now, and you are already well on your way.